what a win then for Borussia Dortmund, going to St James's Park and getting that 1-0 victory, and this group is still absolutely wide open. Let's just take a look at the significance of that win for Dortmund. It lifts them up to second in the table now. PSG top, AC Milan sitting at the bottom, still in search of their first win. Craig, where'd this come from?
Well, there was a little bit of luck in the second half, but actually Dortmund for long periods were the better side. I think I'm going to use a word that you wouldn't use for Dortmund very often, particularly away from home: resilient. They looked quite resilient tonight. They actually wanted to defend. It was a horrible night in terms of the weather. The crowd were obviously behind Newcastle, and Dortmund, for the most part, defended very well and passed the ball better than Newcastle. That was the problem. This was somewhere in between the Milan and the PSG performance for Newcastle. The passing was poor, it was sloppy, giving possession back, all a little panicky and rushed in the final third. And Dortmund were actually the opposite. They're actually the opposite. They looked more clinical, they had less possession, but they were more incisive. And you can argue that they deserved the 3 points, and this has blown this group pretty much wide open. But I just don't think, apart from those efforts we saw at the end, I just don't think Newcastle were at it and were good enough tonight. And I think a reminder that the PSG game has come and gone for them.
Sure.
And that if they don't perform at the highest level in this Champions League, and in this group in particular, bearing in mind they've not been in the Champions League for years and years, they're going to go out. And so I think it's another reminder to Eddie Howe's guys that the game against Paris Saint-Germain at home was a great uplifting feeling. But if they don't reproduce that, they're probably going to be playing in the Europa League.
Is it that simple? That they, like, obviously against PSG they put in 100%, everyone was at it. Borussia Dortmund come to town, maybe not quite the same sort of challenge, certainly in their heads, and they were they were punished for it.
Well, I think Newcastle does depend on that energy and that intensity and St James's Park and all the environment of this sort of evening and this sort of moment. And it just felt like it was difficult for them to recreate that energy. And that's not easy to do. You get to such a height when you beat PSG in the manner in which you did. To try to manufacture that again, to recreate it again, not easy to do. But I do think that there is something about Borussia Dortmund in this match that we should acknowledge. And Craig just mentioned resilience. I think there was a mental toughness about Borussia Dortmund that we don't often see from this team. In fact, I would go as far as to say the reason as to why they lose Bundesliga the last day of the season last year was simply because there was a lack of leadership and lack of mental toughness. Today, they fought through some of those difficult times, through some of that pressure from Newcastle. They were willing to get out in transition. They were willing to get out in moments in which they could go in the counter-attack. And in fact, you can make the argument in the first half, Daniel Malen should have had 2 goals. Nicholas Fulker should have had a goal himself. He did not. The ability of Borussia Dortmund to grind out a result, which we saw on the weekend against Werder Bremen, and doing it again against Newcastle away from home, maybe this is a trend for this team that we were not expecting. I'm going to make this much more so about Borussia Dortmund, who were in a very, very difficult position going into this match, going away from home and being able to do what they did today. Yes, Newcastle came up short, and I think the injury to Alexander Isak was a big problem for them as well early on in the match. Regardless, I'm going to give credit to Borussia Dortmund because they showed today that even if it is just one game, they can grind out a result away from home in Champions League.
I think it's shown that Luis Enrique was actually a little arrogant in his approach to the Newcastle game, Paris Saint-Germain, that is, that they could play the 4 forwards. There wasn't a lot of tracking back, and we're just going to destroy Newcastle. And Newcastle found all this space to counter-attack. Edin Terzic was like, listen, we're not going to come here and just throw everybody forward. We're going to make sure we've got a good shape. They're going to become impatient. The crowd are going to get behind them. And as Ali said, Daniel Malen was a real thorn in the side down that right-hand side in the first half. So Dortmund realised that they were the best form of attack for them was defence, and just sit in, suck Newcastle in and frustrate Newcastle. And listen, Newcastle will have to learn that not every team's going to come like PSG and chuck all these forwards in. And they're going to have to find a different way, and they're going to have to be more patient at home. There were none of those tonight. And Dortmund surprised me. They really surprised me, and fair play to them. They deserved it tonight.